2549, Eye of the Beholder. Effie frowned, sensing that something had gone wrong. She let go of the ancient reflection's shoulder and drew her hand back. What? Sunny just barely had time to grab her and pull her away before the Castellan's body was contorted by a strange convulsion. His glassy eyes opened widely, and then, a vast flood of white mist suddenly exploded from his body in all directions, drowning the vast underground chamber. Suddenly, Sunny could not see anything except the milky white mist swirling around him like a ghostly ocean. A familiar sense of his very being collapsing into nothingness washed over him for a brief moment, but then, Sunny forcefully asserted his existence and pushed the feeling back. Concentrate on your true name. Will yourself to remember who you are. Effie must have done as he told, and her willpower must have been sufficiently firm, because she seemed to regain her bearings just a few moments later. For a few long moments, nothing seemed to exist in the world except for the ghostly fog and the feelings of the two of them holding each other. All sounds had disappeared, as well, muffled by the white mist. Sunny looked around, full of dark anticipation. And then, a disembodied voice resounded in the silence, enveloping them like a tide. Ah, what a strange sensation. I've never taken a reflection as a vessel before, it feels so odd. But also oddly fitting. The voice laughed, full of amusement, but Sunny did not share that feeling. Instead, he was full of wariness. Mordred, that bastard. It seemed like Mordred had escaped from Morgan and Saint, after all. He had found the right reflection to escape to. He must have traveled to the eyes that had been stolen from the victims of the Nihilist, then reflected from them into Effie's, and finally entered the Castellan's eyes from hers. And now, he had consumed the Castellan and made the ancient reflection his vessel. Things must not have gone well for Mordred, though, both in the battle against Saint and in the soul duel with the reflection of Omer of the Nine. Otherwise, he would not have been talking, he would have already moved to kill Effie and usurp the authority over the Palace of Imagination. And speaking about that authority, the ocean of white mist around them stirred suddenly, and then moved, flowing slowly at first, then faster and faster. If Sunny was to hazard a guess, Mordred was probably in the process of absorbing the essence of the Castellan. Considering how much of the mist there was, it would probably take him a bit of time. And when that time ran out, Sunny decided not to think about it. Instead, he thought about how to deal with the Prince of Nothing. Effie moved slightly, reaching for her gun. I am guessing we won't be able to shoot him dead, will we? Sunny shook his head, and at that moment, the disembodied voice spoke once more from the white mist, seemingly coming from all directions at the same time. What an amusing suggestion, Saint Athena. But I am afraid I will have to disappoint you. To tell you the truth, you could have probably finished my original body off with a mundane bullet at the moment. It is in quite rough shape after getting to know the Child of Nether better, alas. But, luckily, I've managed to secure a new attire just in time. An ominous note found its way into Mordred's pleasant voice. So, am I very curious to see just what this vessel is capable of. Sunny remained calm, thinking. Mordred's new vessel was the body of the Castellan. But the Castellan himself was dead, destroyed in a soul duel. Wouldn't that mean that the authority he had usurped belonged to no one at the moment, then? And since no one was usurping it, wouldn't that authority return to its intended owner, the master of the castle, or rather, its mistress? Effie. He paused for a moment, and then said in an even tone. Tell me to regain my power. The white mist was a raging current now, moving around the vast chamber like a powerful whirlpool. Mordred had to be at the center of that whirlpool, straining to absorb the furious torrent of nothingness that was pouring into his soul. Effie shifted and looked at him for a split second, confusion clearly written on her face. Then, her eyes gleamed with understanding. She smiled faintly, suffering from the lack of potency. Huh. Not performing as you used to. Well, Auntie Effie can help with that. You're a sovereign partner. Rise and shine. And as she spoke those words, Sunny swayed and staggered. If not for Effie supporting him, he might have toppled over. Ah, suddenly, he felt his powers returning to him. Effie did not seem to have regained full control over the Palace of Imagination yet, or maybe she was simply unable to wield that authority as intricately as the Castellan had been able to. Therefore, her command had failed to completely negate the laws of the illusion established by him fully, even if Mirage City was already falling apart. But it did negate them to an extent. Sunny was definitely not a mundane person anymore, and he could sense some facets of his aspect becoming unsealed. Not enough to give him his full power, by far, but enough to allow his shadow sense to wash over the castle. And that was all that he needed. He had not known it before, but the great tower had collapsed in the furious battle between Saint and Mordred. The roof of the throne room was shattered, and rain was falling on the throne of Mirage. Sunny could sense Saint there, as well as the broken form of Morgan. She was alive, but grievously wounded, being supported by the taciturn shadow as they moved through the debris. Found you. As the white mist in the underground chamber became thin, almost allowing him to see the towering shape of the great mirror, and the figure of Mordred at the heart of the furious white whirlwind, Sunny reached through the shadows and pulled both Saint and Morgan underground. A moment later, they appeared on the stone floor beside him. Morgan staggered and fell, blood flowing from the ghastly wounds on her body. Saint, however, maintained her balance easily. Sunny forced out a smile, knowing that it was all going to be over for them the moment Mordred finished absorbing the ocean of white mist, and nodded in his direction. Go drown him in true darkness. Go. True darkness was an enemy of shadows, but it was an enemy of reflections as well. Because just like shadows, reflections could not exist without light. Saint lunged forward at terrible speed, not wasting even a split second to question his words. Her eyes blazed with cold crimson flames, and the white mist parted in front of her. Mordred let out a melodious laugh. How cunning, Lord of Shadows. Ah, but it is too late, much too late. A tidal wave of true darkness escaped from Saint's body, crashing into the white whirlwind. It washed over him before he could even finish the sentence. Effie knelt near Morgan to check her wounds, then looked at Sunny. Do you think Saint will be able to destroy his vessel? Sunny lingered with the answer for a moment. Then, he shook his head. No, if she could, he would not have stayed still to meet her attack. But she would be able to buy them some time. Effie whispered something to Morgan, and her bleeding seemed to slow down. She must have regained some of her powers, as well, enough of them survive her terrible wounds, at least. Something collided with a terrible boom under the cover of true darkness, and the underground chamber shook. Effie cursed. So what do we do? Sunny stayed silent for a few long moments, looking into the darkness with a tense expression. Then, suddenly, he smiled. Follow me. I'm going to need your strength. Instead of joining Saint in the battle against Mordred, he ran into the opposite side, toward the Great Mirror. That was because he had guessed what form the fragment of Weaver's lineage had taken, was going to take. Reaching the Great Mirror, he grabbed the black fabric covering it and gestured for Effie to do the same. Pull. 2550. Broken illusion. The Great Mirror was truly enormous, and although the sheet of fabric covering it was thin, it was still incredibly vast and heavy. So, he needed Effie's Herculean strength to pull it off the hidden surface. They pulled as hard as they could, and the fabric moved, slowly at first, and then faster and faster. It rippled and fell, slowly revealing the silver surface of the Great Mirror. At that moment, there was another deafening boom, and Saint's body flew out of the pool of true darkness, trailing drops of blood behind it. Sunny acted before he knew what he was doing, stepping through the shadows to catch her. He slid a few meters back, holding her petite human form in his arms, and then gently put her on the floor. A suffocating sense of anger rose in his chest. I'm glad that this bastard is nearly immortal. He won't die, so I'll be able to torture him endlessly. The white mist was entirely gone now. To his left, Effie dashed back to escape the vast black shroud of the falling mirror cover. To his right, Morgan slowly rose from the floor, her scarlet eyes burning with a sharp intent. Right in front of Sunny, some distance away, Mordred slowly walked out of the darkness. He looked around with an easy smile, then swept the Castellan's disheveled hair back and looked at his hands. What a curious vessel. Its nature is almost dangerous, I think. Oh, but this won't do at all. Suddenly, the figure of the Castellan grew blurry and changed, transforming into Mordred's own appearance. Reflections were transient beings, after all, capable of changing into anything facing them. Mordred seemed to have mastered that aspect of his new vessel swiftly. When he turned to Sunny, his amicable smile suddenly felt dark and sinister. Now, where were we? Oh, yes, all of you owe me something, and it's time to collect. Let's start with eliminating the usurper who had stolen Bastion from me. He threw a murderous look at Effie and took a step forward. But then, his expression changed. The billowing black shroud finally fell to the floor, revealing the vast expanse of the Great Mirror, and what reflected on it. Sunny looked up, shivering as a pale smile appeared on his lips. Out there, on the surface of the Great Mirror, all of them were reflected clearly: Sunny, Effie, Morgan, Saint, and Mordred. But none of it mattered, because there was another reflection trapped in the colossal mirror, cast by nothing. A dark figure that towered at 100 meters height, looming above them all like a nebulous deity. It wore a tattered black mantle, standing with its back to the vast underground chamber, but as the black shroud fell, the figure moved slightly and turned, casting its terrifying gaze at the 5 mortal ants far below. Its black wooden mask was snarling fiercely, and there was nothing but darkness nestling in its eyes. 3 horns rose above its head like a jagged crown. Weaver. It was a reflection that the demon of fate had left in the great mirror of the Palace of Imagination thousands of years ago. As Sunny's eyes gleamed with awe, Effie paled and took a step back. Morgan let out a groan and collapsed to her knees, shutting her eyes and covering them with both hands. Saint shuddered on the floor. Mordred remained motionless for a long moment and then slowly turned to face the great mirror. What the hell is this? He looked up to behold the reflection of Weaver, and as he did, his face became twisted by an expression of utter terror. Mordred raised a trembling hand, as if trying to hide himself from the demon's harrowing gaze. But he never did, because in the next moment, his body simply exploded into a cloud of glass shards, obliterated on the spot by the mere pressure of Weaver's presence. Witnessing a demon's reflection was already terrible enough. But Mordred had not just seen it. Since he possessed a sense that allowed him to perceive reflections, he had no choice but to perceive the reflection of Weaver in all its unfathomable immensity. And that alone was enough to destroy his vessel, which failed to endure the strain. The bastard might have even died, although Sunny doubted that very much. Mordred had probably retreated somewhere in terror to hide and lick his wounds. But Sunny had no time to think about that. He stared at the reflection of Weaver, entranced, and then took an unconscious step back. As he did, his own reflection overlapped with the reflection of the demon of fate. And when it did, the surface of the great mirror rippled. A moment later, only one of the 2 reflections remained. Sunny blacked out. A few hours later, Effie and Morgan stood on the wall of the castle, looking at the turbulent waters of the lake beyond. The rain had finally stopped, and the sky cleared, not that it brought them any relief. Mirage City was gone, and the sky itself was cracked, slowly crumbling as the ancient illusion crumbled. The world seemed to be ending. But the silver moon was still slowly rising into the shattered sky. At this speed, this entire place will cease to exist in a few days. Morgan turned slightly when she spoke, then nodded. What kind of illusion will you create in its place? Effie lingered for a while. I am not sure. Something to prepare Awakened for challenging nightmares, I think. Or for waging large-scale wars against the nightmare creatures. We will have to wait and see. I don't think it will be as elaborate as Mirage City, though. After all, I am not a reflection of a genius storyteller that had existed for thousands of years. Morgan nodded again, then looked to the side. There, the body of the Lord of Shadows was sprawled on the battlements, with Saint standing guard above it. She frowned. Why is he still unconscious? And what actually happened there, in front of the great mirror? Effie looked at Sunny, too, then shrugged. Well, he seems to have gobbled up a reflection of the demon of fate. Just another Tuesday for him, surely. Don't worry, though, he'll come around eventually. That guy won't be brought down by something as frivolous as a sinister demon. Morgan stared at her incredulously for a while, then sighed. Well, if you say so, not that I care too much. Anyway, our ticket out of here has arrived. She pointed to the lake in front of them, with dark edifices of drowned buildings rising from it like gravestones. Out there, on the dark surface of the still water, the reflection of the moon was shining with pale silver light. Effie grimaced. So we are swimming again. She shook her head dejectedly, then took off her shoes and looked at Taciturn Shadow. Saint, you do not look so good. Let me carry him. Saint seemed to be struggling, indeed. It was not because of the wounds she had received in the battle with Mordred, rather, it was because of the strain of forcefully suppressing her evolution to remain by her master's side. Still, instead of letting Effie carry Sunny, she silently leaned down and picked up his unconscious body herself. Effie smiled. Well, all right, in that case. With that, she climbed onto the parapet of the castle wall and looked at the distant reflection of the moon. Let's go home. Somewhere in the eastern quadrant, a convoy carrying the refugees to a port city was scattered across the desolate wasteland, with many vehicles overturned or letting out pillars of smoke. If they had only made it to their destination, they would have been safe. Out there in the waters near the city, the night garden was resting on the waves, and everything in its sphere of influence was safe from the horrifying threat of the Skinwalker, for now, at least. Soon, Soul Reaper and her colossal ship would have to return to the Dream Realm to replenish the Great Citadel's reserves of essence. But the convoy had not made it to the destination. Instead, it was ambushed by the vessels of the Abomination, and was now nearly destroyed. People said that the Skinwalker was on the verge of an evolution, perhaps they were to become the last sacrifice to fuel its descent into the status of a profane deity. The survivors had retreated to the head vehicles, desperately trying to fight the vessels of the Skinwalker off. But it was hopeless, they were already surrounded, and the Abomination had already taken several of their most powerful warriors. Now, those warriors were a part of the Skinwalker, helping the other vessels break the resistance of the last group. Stay strong. Don't let them get close. Don't let them touch you. An ascended officer tried to rally his soldiers, but in the next moment, an arrow pierced his enchanted armor. The Skinwalker had been learning to use human weapons as of late, which only made it more deadly. But now, the vessels of the eerie abominations showed more coordination and discipline than seasoned human troops, washing over the continent like an unstoppable plague. The Ascended let out a groan and fell to one knee, looking up to see the vessels of the Skinwalker closing in on the group of refugees from all sides. One of them was already right in front of him. The creature looked like a human, and had been human once, but now, it was impossible to mistake it for a person. Its gaze was too alien now that it had cast away pretenses, too eerie, too dreadful. The Ascended bit his lip and prepared to end his own life. It was better than becoming one of these creatures, at least. But then, something strange happened. The vessel of the Skinwalker flinched, and then shuddered, bending down in a violent contortion. It trembled for a moment or two, then grew still. Something similar was happening to the other vessels, as well, spreading among them like a strange infection. What? Gritting his teeth, the Ascended picked up his sword and staggered back to his feet, preparing to make his last stand. Then, the vessel of the Skinwalker in front of him straightened and looked around with an aloof expression. Finally glancing back at the Ascended, it lingered for a moment, and then offered him a friendly smile. "Ah, the weather is wonderful today, isn't it? What a day to be alive." The stranger chuckled as the rest of the Skinwalker vessels around them fell to the ground, then slowly rose again, all wearing the same smile. "Off you go, then. Do not fret, I will take it from here. There is nothing to worry about." End of Part 2. Mirage City Noir. 2551 Fragments of a Broken Soul. A vast and somber expanse of white mist sprawled beneath a bleak, stormy sky. The surging storm clouds were heavy with rain, ready to explode with thunder and lightning. The sea of white mist was restless, flowing on the currents of ghostly winds. A pale light was suffusing the clouds and pouring onto the misty sea below. There, in the tempestuous sky, 7 radiant spheres were shining like suns, their cold rays falling through the tears in the veil of the storm. It seemed as though vague symbols were carved into the surface of the pale suns, hiding beneath it like shadows. A man was sitting on the surface of the sea, surrounded by mist, looking up at the silent tempest. The surging clouds, the rays of pale light, and the 7 radiant spheres reflected in his eyes as if in a mirror. His gaze was solemn, and his expression was distant. He was Mordred, the fragment of Mordred who had spent most of his life in the Palace of Imagination, living among people who he knew were no different from illusions, in a world that he knew was a mirage. Now, even that mirage had been taken from him, and he found himself imprisoned here, in the hidden heart of his twin brother's mirror realm. Looking at the raging clouds, he sighed. This mirror realm was vast and nebulous, reflecting the tumultuous world back upon itself. However, its very heart, the place he was inhabiting, was different. It was hidden deeper and defended better, isolated, like a fortified inner keep behind the walls of a great fortress. It did not reflect the world, instead, it was a reflection of his brother's soul sea. There was a living space set up for him here. It was sparse and pragmatic, but also not without a note of fancy. His brother must have collected various items and amenities in preparation for their eventual reunion in the span of countless years. Some of them were opulent and luxurious, worthy of belonging to a member of the most affluent legacy clan, some would fit a mundane soldier better. There was a modest manor with a tastefully decorated back garden standing in the mist. There was a massive military APC and camp kitchen set up in the mist nearby, as well as several alloy water tanks. There was a vast library full of books, writing and calligraphy utensils, elegant tea sets, and a large storage of varied food supplies. There were paths to take walks, with various curios placed in the mist along them, rock formations, sculptures and relics found in remote regions of the Dream Realm, strange machines and mundane artifacts from Earth, towering carcasses of fantastical nightmare creatures his brother must have slain. And much more. Mordred was discovering new things every day. It was a bit of a letdown compared to his previous lifestyle, but he was comfortable. If a little lonesome, for now. After all, his brother did not have time to visit at the moment. The raging clouds, the restless currents in the sea of mist, the powerful winds that blew across the vast expanse of the Mirror Realm, as if trying to tear it apart, it was not how things were supposed to be. Instead, it was a sign that his brother's soul was under assault. He was at war, fighting for his life. Even the innermost part of his Mirror Realm was in a tumultuous state, its walls trembling, so there was no saying what kind of fury and devastation was reigning outside. As Mordred glanced up, subtle cracks appeared on the surface of one of the seven suns. Malignant tendrils or revolting darkness spread in those cracks, marring the radiant surface of the sphere and consuming it from the inside like a tumor. Before too long, the light of the soul core dimmed, and it came to resemble an appalling, diseased star that seeped grotesque black tears. A moment later, the soul core shattered like glass. A rift opened in the sky, and its shards were forcefully expelled, taking the mass of spreading darkness with them. The winds howled, and the mist surged. A twisting white pillar ascended into the sky, connecting the vast sea with the furious tempest above like a twisting tornado. As more mist poured into the clouds, a new, pristine soul core was slowly formed to replace the shattered one. That was a reflection of his brother's soul becoming infected with corruption. He had torn one of his soul cores out, callously mutilating himself, to prevent the corruption from spreading. Then, using the vast reservoir of power he had absorbed after slaying the Castellan, he created a new one. This way, the Prince of Nothing saved himself. But it was of little use. Because before too long, a different soul core dimmed, rotting with vile darkness. That one was shattered and expelled, as well, and a new one eventually took its place. The somber expanse of his soul sea reeled, the white mist surging under the assault of cold winds. This was not the first or second time Mordred had observed the terrifying spectacle transpiring in the sky above him, and it wasn't going to be the last. This battle had been going on for days. For now, his brother was managing to balance the price of continuously sacrificing parts of his soul to carve out corruption, but how long would it last? He had gained a great deal after absorbing the essence of the Castellan, but that stolen boon was not endless. The sea of mist was overflowing for now, but it already seemed thinner than it had been before. What would happen when it vanished entirely, revealing the still water beneath? What would happen when Mordred saw a flawless reflection of the tempest above on the placid surface of his brother's soul sea? What would happen when even the storm clouds vanished? He was worried, he was restless, he wanted to help, but what could he do? Mordred was merely an awakened, after all. Even then, he had lived most of his life as a mundane human. The scope and terror of the battle happening outside the walls of his comfortable shelter was far beyond his ability to comprehend, let alone affect. He was of no use to his brother, to anyone. Taking a deep breath, Mordred finally glanced down. Then, he closed his eyes and concentrated, a resolute expression appearing on his face. Nothing happened for a long while. And then, a tiny tendril of white fog slowly rose from the surface of the misty sea, being drawn to him by some invisible force. Some time later, there was another. Soon enough, dozens of thin streams of white mist surrounded him, being slowly absorbed into his body. Mordred was not at all as capable as his powerful, terrifying brother, but at the core of their being, they were the same person. So, he could become someone capable, as well. 2552 King of Nothing. The Eastern Quadrant had been one of the four great strongholds of humanity once. It was perhaps not as large and populous as the Northern Quadrant, but hundreds of millions of people still called it home. Now, mere years after Antarctica had fallen, Australia itself was on the verge of being consumed by the powers of corruption. The difference between the two was that while the Southern Quadrant had fallen to an endless flood of monsters birthed by the chain of nightmares, the Eastern Quadrant was being devoured by a single, insidious nightmare creature. The Great Terror, Skinwalker. Of all the horrors brought to Earth by the nightmare spell, this one was perhaps the most harrowing, not because it was the most powerful, but simply because it could mimic human behavior almost flawlessly and blend in with mundane people without raising any suspicion. And even worse than that, the Skinwalker had shown a frightening ability to learn and adapt with terrible speed. Its first appearance had gone unnoticed, and by the time the powers watching over humanity learned of its existence, it was already too late. The Skinwalker. had infected countless cities in the Eastern Quadrant, embedding its vessels among the mundane population, the awakened warriors, the government forces, and even the private armies of the local legacy clans. There were few of these vessels, at first, maybe because the nightmare creature was biding its time and learning the ways of humanity before starting to spread like a plague. Some of them were eventually hunted down and destroyed, but not all of them. Even if the sovereigns reigned supreme, they could not fight a nightmare creature that they could not find. And their forces had been pulled away to fight an internal war, regardless. By the time the original sovereigns had fallen and Changing Star of the Immortal Flame took the throne of mankind, it was already too late. Humanity managed to prevent the Skinwalker from spreading to other quadrants or consuming the human settlements in the Dream Realm, but the sinister fiend became too deeply rooted in Australia. A single settlement fell first, all of its citizens becoming vessels of the eerie nightmare creature. Then, another one, and then another one still. Before too long, the whole quadrant had been washed over by the spreading plague, and a full-scale war against the Skinwalker commenced in earnest. That war was not going well for the humans. The Eastern Quadrant siege capital still stood, and they still controlled most of the coastal area facing the Indian Ocean. However, the inner expanse of the continent and its southern reaches were fully conquered by the Skinwalker. And almost every day, the Great Terror took more lives, gained more vessels, and conquered more land. The spread of the horrid plague seemed unstoppable. The humans were slowly retreating toward EQSC, losing one city after another. In fact, they had not been routed entirely only because Changing Star herself took to the battlefield as often as the laws governing the waking world allowed her, pushing the Skinwalker back from time to time. But even with her support and with the best saints of humanity joining the war effort, the nightmare creature continued to spread. Eventually, it became clear that the continent could not be saved, so, a grievous decision to evacuate it was made, and the Dream Gate opened in the heart of EQSC to take the refugees away, the naval convoys arriving to ferry them north. The arrival of Soul Reaper Jet and the Night Garden helped stabilize the situation. A fragile balance was achieved in the Eastern Quadrant, for a short while. The Skinwalker had taken millions upon millions of vessels by then. Among them were millions of humans, both mundane and awakened, but there were millions of lesser nightmare creatures from the wild reaches of the continent as well. No one really knew how many vessels the nightmare creature possessed now, and even if someone did, there was no way to defend the vast expanse of the continent from that terrible, ever-growing force. And worst of all, both the academics and the diviners in the service of the human domain were unanimous in their suspicion that the Skinwalker was on the verge of evolving, either to the cursed rank or to the Titan class, or perhaps both. If it did, neither Soul Reaper nor the Night Garden would be able to hold it back anymore, and the entire population of the Eastern Quadrant, including the military forces of humanity concentrated there, would be consumed without having time or opportunity to evacuate. The situation was dire, and it was in that dire crisis that something odd began to happen. There were isolated reports at first, then a wave of them, all saying the same things, that the Skinwalker was behaving strangely. As if something was attacking the terrifying nightmare creature from within, fighting for control of its vessels. That something was Mordred, the Prince of Nothing, the banished son of the King of Swords, the traitor to the fallen clan Valor, and the executioner of the House of Night. Mordred had gained a lot in the Palace of Imagination, even if he lost a powerful new vessel of his own at the very end. He managed to retrieve his only weakness and escape the wrath of the Lord of Shadow relatively unscathed. However, that was not enough, not nearly enough, considering what was coming and how little time he had left to prepare for the approaching calamity. So, he decided to play one last, desperate gambit, something for which he had been preparing for a long time. He, who was nearly immortal, put his life on the line and left himself no way out but success. Mordred challenged the Great Terror to a soul duel. There, in the dreadful darkness of the Skinwalker's profane soul, surrounded by the unfathomable expanse of corruption, Mordred fought the eldritch nightmare creature tooth and nail, not holding anything back. His own soul was mangled and poisoned, but he tore pieces of it out and continued to fight. And in the process, he did something else. His own daring, impossible act of defiance. Ever since becoming a saint, Mordred had been struggling to maintain his sense of self. Unwilling to become a demented and broken thing like the Soul Stealer, he limited the use of his transcendent ability to only separating himself to inhabit a handful of vessels, a dozen or two, at most. Now, he abandoned all caution. Mordred needed to splinter a fragment of his soul to create an independent incarnation, so now, he shattered himself into a million pieces. He, who had always dreamed of becoming whole again, tore himself apart completely. That was the only way for him to defeat the Skinwalker. Because with each vessel Mordred stole from him, the power of the eerie fiend lessened a little. In a sense, trying to keep his shattered self from crumbling was as difficult as battling the Great Terror, no, maybe more so. That was the limit he had to overcome. Mordred's and the Skinwalker's horrid, relentless, unseen battle lasted for a long while. Hours turned into days, and days turned into weeks. Each of his soul cores had been destroyed and reforged anew countless times. The pool of power he had absorbed in Mirage City slowly exhausted itself, and then ran dry completely. That was when Mordred finally broke through his limit. He destroyed the Skinwalker and took over all of its vessels, millions of human vessels, and millions of nightmare creatures. And somewhere along the way, Mordred became the seventh sovereign born from humanity, and the third one to attain supremacy without the help of the nightmare spell. However, his domain was unlike those of the other six. That was because Mordred had no citadels, no territories, and no subjects. His reign was not founded on anything, and he ruled nothing, only himself. With his millions of vessels, Mordred was like a nation in and of himself, self-sufficient and self-reliant, depending on nobody, beholden to nothing. With no weaknesses the Dreamspawn could exploit. As the sun rose above the devastated eastern quadrant, the world welcomed a new sovereign. Of course, his emergence caused a great stir among other powers governing the dying world. Now, unexpectedly, they needed to decide how to deal with the new king. The King of Nothing, 2553, a monster with 10,000 heads. The graceful silhouette of the Ivory Island drifted among the clouds above Bastion. Contoured against the golden sun, it glanced breathtaking and peaceful from the ground. However, the atmosphere within the walls of the Tower of Hope was far from tranquil. In fact, it was tense and somber despite the suffocating power of the 5 people gathered in a spacious council room on one of the great pagoda's 7 floors. Sunny, Neffys, Cassie, Effie, and Kai were seated around a table, wearing grim expressions. Cassie was talking, and the more she said, the heavier the mood in the room became. Sunny heard each word clearly and grasped their meaning flawlessly. At the same time, he found himself getting distracted as his newly altered mind spread far and wide, absorbing thousands of different perspectives with the same degree of focused clarity. It was an odd state of being, and one he was still failing to get used to. The reason for his current state was, of course, the fragment of Weaver's lineage he had collected in the Palace of Imagination. Mind Weave. No wonder I was out cold for so long. The 4 previous fragments had put him out of commission for a short while and caused him indescribable agony. Absorbing and assimilating them had been a torment, but the Mind Weave was different. Perhaps it was because it had altered his mind on a fundamental level, or perhaps it was because the suffering had been too great to endure even for someone as used to pain as Sunny, but he simply passed out as soon as Weaver's terrible reflection fused with his own. So, he did not remember experiencing any pain at all. That was a wonderful boon, without a doubt. However, Sunny had remained unconscious for 2 weeks as a result. The chaos his absence had caused was significant. The conquest campaign in the Burn-Ed Forest had almost collapsed, the restoration of the Dark City had fallen behind schedule, and the numerous projects he had been busy with had stalled. Nothing he couldn't salvage had transpired, luckily, but there was plenty of catching up he had to do. If there was one silver lining that had come out of this mess, though, it was that Neffys seemed to have thawed after their recent spat. In fact, she was more attentive to him now than she had been before, albeit in a subtle way, which secretly pleased Sunny a great deal. The body of a sovereign was enormously enduring, meaning that a few weeks of coma were not going to harm it in any way, so, Neffys had not really nursed him back to health. But staying by his unconscious body for many days, not knowing when his condition would improve, must have rattled her quite a lot, or at least forced her to put things into perspective. No, not even an unconscious body. With Sunny out cold, his incarnations were released and reverted back to being independent shadows. That must have been even more difficult for Neffys to endure. As a result, the distance between them disappeared, almost making it seem like there was no disagreement between them. Almost. Sunny sighed faintly. In any case, he did come back to his senses eventually. And when he did, the world was quite different from how it had been before, or at least Sunny perceived it differently from how he had before. The difference was so startling, in fact, that he had spent a few more days entirely disoriented. It was difficult to describe the tectonic shift that had happened to him with words. Mind Weave did not exactly make him smarter, wiser, or more intelligent. However, it did increase the volume of his mind immensely, making it seem almost limitless. Sunny was not unfamiliar with this trait, since he had achieved something of the sort himself over the years. First learning to perceive and process the world from both his own point of view and that of his shadow, then slowly expanding the scope of his mind to encompass all of his incarnations while at the same time learning to cope with the increasing reach of his shadow sense. Later still, his mind expanded even more, adapting to receive sensory input from all the shades of the Shadow Legion and every member of the Shadow Clan. Sunny had always perceived what transpired around them passively. Most of the conduits of his perception simply blended into the background, but he could bring dozens of them to the forefront at will, even hundreds, if he really tried. He had thought that to be quite an accomplishment at the time. Now that he had Mind Weave, though, he felt that his previous achievements were merely child's play. As soon as Sunny regained consciousness, he had been assaulted by a crushing avalanche of sensations. The strangest thing, however, was that he had not felt crushed. Instead, he was suddenly able to clearly perceive and concentrate on each of these sensations, as if he was a mythical monster with 10,000 heads and 10,000 arms. Or would that be 20,000 arms? In any case, Sunny had been quite startled. And ever since, he often found himself getting distracted, but also not distracted at all. It was not that he could not concentrate on something while concentrating on 1,000 other things at the same time, it was just that he sometimes failed to put meaning into any one point of view while simultaneously perceiving countless the rest with the same intensity. His mind was drifting. Was this how gods felt, I wonder? Only on a much, much vaster scale. There were benefits to having a mind spacious enough to encompass limitless inputs, of course. Sunny's control over the Shadow Legion had increased tremendously, for example. His ability to envision and execute impossibly complex and intricate patterns while weaving had taken an enormous leap, as well, so much so that it felt like he had been crippled before, and was only now experiencing weaving as it was meant to be. He could pay much more attention to each member of the Shadow Clan, too. But, still, Sunny was somewhat uneasy. He was having a bit of trouble maintaining his former way of thinking in this startling reality, and he was not sure that he was meant to. Sunny felt more distant from the mortal man he had once been now, and that feeling slowly grew. But wasn't that exactly what Uri's had told him had to transpire as one approached apotheosis? Talking to Nefis and especially Cassie had helped him, somewhat. Both of them were experiencing their own version of that strange process, albeit not quite on the same scale. Nefis because of her domain and the sun god's lineage, Cassie because of her aspect and attributes. But it was still a big adjustment to make. Oh, and he had been quite busy ever since regaining consciousness, putting Mind Weave to the test. Sunny, he remained motionless for a few seconds, then raised his head and looked at Cassie. Yes, I am listening. She lingered a little, then nodded. As I was saying, the investigation into the Church of the Moon has produced quite concerning results. Let me share the report. 2554 Info Hazard. Sunny had been able to sense what his other incarnations were doing in Mirage City. Similarly, his other incarnations had been spectators of his strange adventure, therefore, the information shared by Mordred reached Nefis and Cassie almost immediately after he himself received it. The news of a supposedly immediate threat posed by Astarion was not a great shock, even if they had to reevaluate how hazardous he truly was. In truth, both Sunny and Nefis had a feeling that they would have to confront the Third Sovereign sooner or later, so they had taken steps to prepare for his eventual emergence. Mordred's warning came mere days before their own network caught the traces of the Dreamspawn. In fact, if not for the chaos caused by the winter solstice, they would have received the report containing the first clues even earlier. But now that they knew what they were looking for, the investigation had been accelerated. The members of the Shadow Clan, although few in numbers, were spread all across both the waking world and the dream realm. Similarly, Cassie had her own network of informants, some of them voluntary, some unknowing, and kept an eye out for anything strange. The first strange thing that had led to concerning results was one of the countless spreading cults, the Church of the Moon. The cult began quite innocuously. Its members are in the habit of joining merchant caravans and offering blessings for safe travel, blessings of the moon. Not beast god, though, simply the moon. What is strange about the Church of the Moon, however, is the speed with which its following grew. Cassie paused for a second and gestured to a paper representative ORT compiled by Aiko. People of the Nightmare Spell era are usually not easily led astray by superstitions, even harmless ones. But the followers of the moon gained recognition both quickly and widely. It is still quite a minor sect, all things considered, but there lies the problem. She frowned. After noticing the suspicious pattern, we used the government personnel to run an analysis on the other minor cults in the database. The results are quite worrying, to say the least. There are at least half a dozen similar sects spread around the world. They are in each of the 3 quadrants, the basin of the River of Tears, as well as the former territory of the Sword Domain. And these are only the religious cults. Cassie's expression darkened. There might be other unassuming groups loitering on the edges of society, criminal gangs, private clubs, black market enterprises, and so on. At the moment, there is no way to tell how countless people exactly are. Let's call them sleeper agents, for now. Kai, who had been listening to her quietly, asked in a concerned tone. How have we not noticed them before? And, even if they are indeed secret followers of that man, the Dreamspawn, what does that entail exactly? What do they do? What has raised our suspicion, apart from an abnormal rate of growth? Sunny smiled darkly. That is the question, isn't it? Cassie let out a sigh. The second question answers the first. What do they do? Ostensibly, nothing of any importance. That is why we have not discovered anything suspicious about them sooner. Effie raised an eyebrow. If they have done nothing wrong, how do we know that they serve our favorite scarecrow, Mr. Lunatic? Cassie lingered for a few seconds. I said that they have done nothing of importance, not that they have done nothing. From the outside, their activity seems quite benign, if a little misguided, offering blessings, giving troubled people a sense of community, and holding sermons from time to time. However, once we dug deeper. She paused, then sighed again. Well, really, we still did not find anything sinister. At most, some members of these sects are guilty of minor vandalism. Our agents could not discover more, because they do not know what they are looking for. But when I took a look personally and concentrated on the areas where the members of these cults are active, I saw something eerie. Cassie paused, then continued in a grim tone. Those minor acts of vandalism were mainly things like painting graffiti on the walls of various buildings. And those graffiti all contain the name I am not going to say aloud, the name of the Dreamspawn. Effie glanced at her, then at Neffys and Sunny. Do their paintings possess some kind of beguiling power? Are they using runic sorcery? Maybe. Cassie shook her head. The graffiti possess no power. They are just mundane drawings. The name itself, however, the name itself does. Kai frowned. What kind of power can a name possess? He paused for a moment and then added in an embarrassed tone, I am sorry, I misspoke. Names obviously possess power. There are true names and shaping, after all. But I don't think you meant that kind of power, Cassie. So, what can the Dreamspawn's name do? Cassie remained silent for a while, then said with a subdued expression. It has the power to spread. She lowered her head and exhaled slowly. Once someone learns that name, it seems to take root in their mind. Then, they start mentioning it from time to time without even realizing. And while that in and of itself does not seem too worrisome, the frightening part is that the name spreads like a virus. Anyone who hears it becomes a carrier, as well, and therefore, helps it spread further. Her expression turned grim. We caught it early enough, so the virus has not spread too widely yet. This is the good news. She did not seem too happy, though. Cassie lingered for a few seconds, then added evenly. The bad news is that there are no countermeasures. We can destroy the graffiti, but the Dreamspawn's name has already been seen or heard by countless people, and we can't destroy people. Or rather, we won't. There is no way to identify all of the hosts, anyway. Neffys nodded silently. Cassie turned her way briefly, then said. More than that, although I compared the Dreamspawn's name to a virus, it is not in the traditional sense. It is an idea that acts as a virulent virus. And therefore, there is no cure that we can come up with, no vaccine, no easily reproduced way to treat the infected. She fell silent for a few seconds, then sighed heavily. So, even though we caught it early, there is no way to stop it. The rate with which it spreads will grow exponentially. Cassie faced them then, and said in a grave tone. It's a pandemic. 2555 Nameless Menace. A heavy silence settled in the council room. No one spoke for a while, considering her ominous words. Eventually, Effie leaned back and rubbed her temple. How troublesome, she sighed. What about us? We all know his name. Are we infected, as well? Cassie shrugged. It is difficult to tell. From what I have been able to observe so far, not everyone is susceptible to his influence equally. The more powerful a person is and the more mental fortitude they possess, the less frequently they mention the name, which can be seen as them resisting infection. However, there is a difference between resistance and immunity. We also don't know if they are resisting the infection itself, or merely a symptom. Effie grimaced, dissatisfied with the answer. And that's the problem, isn't it? We just don't know enough. We hardly know anything, really. Kisong and Anvil were too thorough in eradicating any and all knowledge about the Dreamspawn from the world. Hell, she glanced around the room and said in a somber tone, we don't even know why his name being known to people is dangerous. Does the Dreamspawn draw power from those who are infected by the idea of him? Is he rebuilding a foundation of his domain that way? What happens when the virus reaches critical mass? Effie shook her head. How are we supposed to fight an enemy we know close to nothing about? After another bout of heavy silence, Kai spoke in a hesitant tone. Still, how dangerous can that man be? Sure, he is a supreme inheritor of a divine lineage, possibly even several of them, if Mordred is to be believed. But he is not a wielder of a divine aspect, unlike Nephis and Sunny. More than that, he has been sealed on the moon for 2 decades. It is already a miracle that he has survived for that long. So how powerful can he still be? Even though the question was not directed at Sunny, and his flaw did not force him to answer, he still answered, let's not get careless. It does not matter how powerful we are, power is merely a weapon. And just like a weapon, it won't save you unless drawn and pointed at the adversary. Truthfully, Sunny did not think that Astarion could contend against him and Nephis in terms of power, either of them, let alone the two of them together. However, raw power was not a universal answer. One had to express the power they possessed shrewdly to make use of it. Even then, one moment of complacency could spell disaster. And further still, there was always someone or something that countered your aspect in the vast and harrowing world of the nightmare spell. A bad matchup could bring down even the strongest beings, awakened and nightmare creatures both. Sunny knew all this better than most because he had triumphed over innumerable foes who were far more powerful than he and should have utterly crushed him. So, he was not going to underestimate Astarion. Especially not after seeing how spooked Mordred was by his former caretaker. Calling the Dreamspawn his guardian would have probably been too big a stretch. Sadly, that did not change much in the current situation. Effie frowned. So what now? What can we even do? Cassie remained silent for a while, then said, one option is to do what Kisong and Anvil did. Find a way to identify everyone infected by the Dreamspawn, then cull them all. Naturally, that would be a slaughter of horrifying proportions. Nephis shook her head. No, he looked at them and said in her even, dispassionate voice, we are not going to slaughter thousands, or possibly even hundreds of thousands of innocent people. If we do, we would be no better than Song and Valor. What was the point of overthrowing them, then? Sunny studied her silently. Behind Neff's calm facade, she was actually a person burning with passion, more than anyone he knew, possibly. Nephis wanted to conquer all nightmares and destroy the nightmare spell with a passion so ferocious that it bordered on obsession, so, it was easy to overlook the rest of her behind that blazing ambition. But Nephis herself was never blinded by her incinerating desire. Even though she was pursuing it with obsessive persistence, for her, the end never justified the means. Sunny had learned it numerous years ago, near the crumbling gateway of the Crimson Spirit, that Nephis did not simply want to destroy the spell, but also did it in a way that she considered right, without compromising her values. It was just that her personal sense of right and wrong was so peculiar that most people often failed to recognize her intentions. Sunny knew, though, he knew that Nephis would never order a massacre of thousands of innocent people to prevent her enemy from growing stronger. She might send them into a bloody battle against a tide of nightmare creatures since that would fit her understanding of what was right and righteous, but she would not simply sacrifice them to further her goals. That conviction was what made her so strong, but it was also something she lacked when compared to Anvil and Kisong. A limitation that, if exploited, could be turned into a weakness. Was that what Mordred meant when he said that we have too much to lose? Sunny was troubled. The Dreamspawn has not even revealed himself yet, and it already feels like our hands are tied. Nephis looked at him briefly, then sighed. There are still initial steps we can take. To learn more, and hopefully work out countermeasures based on that information. She remained silent for a while, contemplating, and then turned to Cassie. Cassie, continue to monitor the zealots and broaden the scope of the investigation to include other marginal groups. Request as much resources as you must. Conscript the entire intelligence arm of the government, if need be. Additionally, I need you to pay a visit to Godgrave and have a conversation with the disgraced patriarch of the Dagonet clan, Saint Jest. Sunny nodded quietly. Old Jest had outlived his king and was now living in exile, confined to a remote citadel in Godgrave with the other staunch loyalists. If anyone knew about Astarion, it would be him. After all, he had been the most loyal enforcer of the great clan Valor. He would have certainly learned a lot about the members of his young master's cohort. Whether Jest would be willing to talk was a question, naturally. But Sunny had no doubt that Cassie would succeed in getting valuable information out of him. She could be quite persuasive when she wanted to, after all, and if that did not work, she could simply plunder other people's memories. Neffy's turned to Kai. Morgan is back in Ravenheart, isn't she? Speak to her as well. Anvil had probably been wary of exposing her to knowledge about the Dreamspawn, considering how dangerous it is, so she would not know as much as Jest, but she can still know something. She also unearthed a part of the secrets left behind by Ki Song, Sishan, too. Learn all you can from them. A strange shadow ran across her face. She lingered for a while, and then looked back at Cassie. Oh, and get me the casualties list among our awakened warriors, everyone who fell in battle ever since the war. Sunny raised an eyebrow. What's that for? Neffys remained silent for a while. Her face did not show any emotion, but he could tell that she was troubled by something. Eventually, she said, all of humanity, most of it, at least, is encompassed by my domain. I can feel the longing of billions of people day and night, washing over me like an ocean tide. Sometimes, too often to count, I can vaguely feel their radiant sparks being extinguished. That means that one of my subjects died. The flame of their desire is gone forever. Her expression grew a little wistful. I've been sensing more and more people dying as of late. The increase in the mortality rate was not significant, so I assumed that it was just the natural course of things. After all, war is raging on all sides. A war to subjugate new regions of the Dream Realm, a war for the Eastern Quadrant. Numerous people have become refugees and settlers, too, and their lives are far less stable than before. Neffys frowned. But now, I think that there might be a different cause. So, I want to check. Kai looked at her in confusion. A different cause? You suspect that the Dreamspawn's followers are responsible for these deaths? Neffys slowly shook her head. No, I suspect that these people, some of them, at least, might not be dead at all. There is another reason for me to lose the ability to sense someone's spark, after all. It is if they have ceased to be a part of my domain. Sunny blinked a couple of times. Meaning, that they became a part of someone else's domain. Like the members of the Shadow Clan, who could not enjoy the grace of Neff's flame due to bearing his mark. He scowled. Do you mean? But before Sunny could finish the sentence, Cassie suddenly flinched. Her eyes widened a little, and she turned to them with a complicated expression. Wait, there is a message from Jet. Cassie paused for a moment, and then said in an urgent tone, something strange just happened in the Eastern Quadrant.